Okay, so we're trying again. Hopefully, I'm going to say hello, YouTube, hello, world. And when we get the thumbs up now, Megan, give me that thumbs up and I'll be happy to start recording.
David, you could be a podcast host. You
Yeah.
got the right sound for this.
Okay, so
You're good. You're good.
okay, we're up on YouTube. Hi, everyone. Welcome, world. All right, so I'm going to start the recording of the Zoom. Here we go. Record to the cloud. All right, welcome, everyone. It is the next in our series of water, wetlands, and watersheds seminars for fall 2025. And this week we have with us Dr. Jules Bruck. So Dr. Jules Bruck is the director of the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning, and she's chair and professor of landscape architecture at the University of Florida. Previously, Dr. Bruck was the founding director of the University of Delaware's Landscape Architecture program. And in 2018, Bruck and colleagues started something called the Coastal Resilience Design Studio. So she's working with state agencies and faculty and community members to bring people together around designing resilient and robust coastal communities and spaces. This Coastal Resilience Design Studio, or CRDS, has received numerous national and state awards while spurring infrastructure investment, stimulating local economic development, and influencing land use policy. This kind of work is the foundation of what Jules does at UF, and she collaborates with multidisciplinary researchers to understand large-scale, nature-based infrastructure planning and design. She teaches broadly across the landscape architecture curriculum, and is a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects. She has a PhD from Texas A&M. So Jules, the floor is yours.
David, thank you so much. And I'm so glad for that introduction because he touched on a lot of things that I'm going to talk about at the beginning of my talk here today, just for context. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. I'm thrilled to be part of the 2025 Water, Wetlands, and Watershed Seminar Series at the Odom Center for Wetlands. And I want to really thank the organizers for the invitation. I'm the director of the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning here at UF, as David mentioned. And so in this role, I have the privilege of working with faculty in both landscape architecture and urban and regional planning departments to foster interdisciplinary research opportunities. So this opportunity here today allows me to share my work with all of you and expand our network of potential future collaborators. So I hope if you like what you hear today, you'll reach out and connect with us at the College of Design, Construction, and Planning. Let's see if I can get my slides to move forward. There we go. David mentioned I'm a landscape architect. I'm focused on coastal community resilience and nature-based infrastructure. And interestingly, I arrived at this research path through work that I started on the suburban biodiversity crisis. And that's why you're seeing a picture of a giant suburban lawn. And through that work, it really showed me how people deeply value ecosystem services tied to water, both water quality and the landscape's ability to absorb water. It also emphasized that people were really concerned about undesirable wildlife. So this project was very interesting, and we learned a lot about, I guess, what we could have assumed. People don't like a biodiverse garden in their yard because it could bring undesirable wildlife like snakes and ticks and spiders and bees. Anyway, all of that makes this biodiversity landscaping project line very difficult and challenging. But the water control and water quality outcomes were very interesting to me. And the insight really led me to examine the coastal edges where water quality and flooding and community identity intersect. And I think this has just been a really interesting place for a landscape architect to work because of those three major components. So over the last decade, I've really learned a great deal from working in coastal communities. And most of this work has been primarily in the Mid-Atlantic region. Today, I'll share a few stories that illustrate the work that I do as a landscape architect in highly collaborative interdisciplinary teams. And everything I show you today has involved a lot of smart people many students and many collaborators, and none of the work could have been done without a very highly engaged team. So I'll back up just a minute. Before I joined UF 3 years ago, I spent 16 years at the University of Delaware. All the work I share here today is research and applied design projects that are located in Delaware. But I have worked on these projects while I was here at UF with my University of Florida team, with the exception of one of the CRDS projects that was completed in my tenure at Delaware, but we continue to work in the small town. I have never figured out a good exit strategy for working in small towns. I tend to stay in the small towns for very, very long periods of time. I'm also going to try to connect all the work that I'm talking about today to my new efforts that are emerging here in Florida. So Delaware, like Florida, is losing wetlands at an alarming rate, roughly 1 acre per day. This is due to urbanization, erosion, sea level rise that causes a coastal squeeze. And I'm going to use that term a lot today, the idea of coastal squeeze, which I'll continuously talk about. As many of you know, when the wetlands are confronted with pressures from both sides, the uplands and from the erosive forces, we lose a lot of critical ecosystem services. And I think this is really deeply concerning. And part of the way that we talk to communities about how they should value these ecosystems. So moving on, to help address this, and David mentioned this, I co-founded a Coastal Resilience Design Studio in 2018 with a colleague from Delaware Sea Grant. He's pictured in the middle there. His name is Ed Lewandowski. We still collaborate on many projects together. Our studio model really grew from one successful project in a small, underserved coastal town. And we recognize that many communities lack resources to plan for resilience. And we built the CRDS to try to fill the gap. And it's basically an interdisciplinary internship program. So some of the successes, it's been very successful. It's employed 39 students since 2020, including 36 undergraduates and 3 graduate students. And 10 of the students continued studies in their graduate programs, including 4 who are working on their PhDs. Another 11 students work in government agencies or private practices conducting coastal affiliated design and planning work. So again, this has been a pretty successful startup, and it has taken on about 22 projects since its inception. And I'm happy to say it's still running today under new leadership since I moved to University of Florida. But here's some additional statistics. We've really engaged with a lot of professions, the government, non-governmental, and private sector professionals across the region. And that's just great networking for our students, but also really good for our communities that we're working for. The most important factor is probably the amount of money that's been driven to these towns as a result of the design work that's done by the students, led by the faculty and the different technical advisors. Over $5 million of funds have been earmarked or awarded to small towns in Delaware from really interesting sources. So it's a lot to be proud of. But today I want to talk about one particular project that took place in 2021 when the CRDS students participated in the Coastal Estuarian Research Federation Student Design Competition in Hampton, Virginia. So if you've heard me talk in the past 4 years, I've probably talked about this project. Our entry, Carbon in the Tidewater, won first place in the student contest and later received an honor award from the American Society of Landscape Architects. And I led this project's powerhouse team of undergraduates and technical advisors with the assistance of my friend Ed, who I introduced you to earlier, as they explored these carbon-focused resilience strategies, which really emerged after their site visit, during which they concluded, and I'll read what's on the slide here directly because it's a little hard to read. There's an urgent need to consider multifunctional coastal infrastructure that lessens the impact of impending climate change scenarios while working toward climate carbon neutrality goals. So they boldly declared that infrastructure of the future must serve its intended purpose and also accomplish additional services, including capturing carbon and enhancing biodiversity. So I'm talking to you at the introduction here about this project because this was really the start of my research projects that I've been doing since 2021. It led to a lot of great research questions, and their project looked comprehensively for solutions to develop infrastructure laced with positive ecosystem benefits. So up in the northern section of this slide of this area in Hampton, Virginia, you can see beneficial use of dredge for land creation. And across the large portion of this landscape to the east, you can see 3D printed oyster reef breakwaters along the open coast and a restoration of a historic wetlands footprint. And the final one, which is called Chesapeake Carbon Gardens on the slide, was these biodiverse landscapes for people who live in the region that were enhanced with high carbon sequestration plants. Again, this was a lot of research that went into this project, but the work sparked new research questions for me and my lab, and really just launched a lot of us into our current research directions. And so it was at the conclusion of that project that I got onto a very large interdisciplinary team. This project is ongoing. It's called DEEDS, which roughly is an acronym for Developing Engineering Practices for Ecosystem Design Solutions. It was part of a large project that was a collaboration between LSU and the Army Corps of Engineers Environmental Research and Design Center, which I developed while I was still at UD. So we worked on this project, our portion of the project called Building Coastal Community Resilience with Nature-Based Solutions. So the project was awarded a $10 million grant through the state of Delaware's legislative body. And as I moved on to Florida, Jack Palaio took over the project. He's a coastal engineer, and he's now the official PI because the project stayed in Delaware. But I'm very involved in the project and sort of co-PI from a distance. And we recently stretched into our 5th year of this project. So we've had a lot of money to do a lot of great things. And I'm going to talk to you today about one CRDS project and 2 DEEDS projects. And that's why I wanted you to understand the background and the context of where these all came together. But as you can see, the team we assembled brings together coastal, civil, environmental engineers, marine biologists, environmental scientists, and landscape architects, among others, each contributing to specialized portions of these different modeling projects and infrastructure projects, but we're all really concerned about the same thing, and that is to enhance wetland health. So that said, there's a lot more than one objective to the DEEDS project, but again, many individual projects. Today, I'm going to share several of them, and one of them includes a very large collaborative where we all come together to work on one major portion of the grant. So as I talked about in the abstract for this presentation today, I'm going to present 3 different cases to show some of the work from DEEDS and one from CRDS, but there are 3 different scales. So the first project I'll highlight was funded by DEEDS. It's the story of how we developed a design strategy for a coastal military installation and modeled the coastal community's future sea level rise scenarios to talk about outcomes and potential nature-based solutions that could help improve wetland health. The second project is a story of engagement in a small community, a very small community. That was a CRDS project. And the final project is ongoing. It's part of the DEEDS collaborative project where we're working to design a mosaic living shoreline system. And that's going to take place in Lewis, Delaware. So the first project is it's like a series of projects that have all happened over the past few years. And it reflects several modeling projects as well as a design conceptual project. And this is pretty typical of how we work in our design studios. We have a lot of modeling data and like a lot of modeling done and some data, as well as community stories. And all of it adds up to a proposed design solution that we share with stakeholders. But just like we talked about earlier, a lot of money can be drifted into these communities from these projects, but it's typically just our work is catalytic. It's not the final step. A lot of times, once we have our projects developed, then grants are written to bring the money in to do the next step, which is typically an engineering feasibility study. So what we're hoping is that in all of our projects, the design is taken into feasibility and then something is eventually implemented. And therefore, the whole idea is to conduct this research and develop design ideas to have actual real impact for the places that we work. And in this DEES project, the focal site was Aberdeen Proving Ground. And this is a really interesting place. It's a major military research and ordnance testing installation that's very historic. It was established in the 1917 during World War I to test munitions. And it's considered the oldest active proving ground in the United States. And we sort of loved the idea of working at a proving ground and trying to think about unique solutions to sea level rise challenges and coastal edge challenges and trying new things and to prove new concepts. So this is located, as you can see from our mapping, it's in Maryland. It's in Hartford County, Maryland, which is in the northern portion of the Chesapeake Bay. It takes up about a third or more of Hartford County. And as you can see in this little puzzle piece, it's a large landmass. It's the part that's in tan. And it's about 113 square miles, which includes 300 miles of roads and 114 miles of shoreline. And the Aberdeen Proving Ground is facing threats from erosion, wetland migration, saltwater intrusion, and there's a lot of infrastructure there that's vulnerable. So our objective, again, to talk about this coastal squeeze was to think about nature-based solutions for APG to protect their existing infrastructure. So we wanted to look at where we could add living shorelines that might help to slow down some of that erosion and protect some wetlands, and how we could model future land use cover scenarios to predict where ecosystem transitions would occur, and also see if we could use the value of carbon, getting back to the carbon in the Tidewater project, to as a tool to prioritize how valuable these spaces are and communicate our design decisions. So like I talked about before, this coastal squeeze is really this idea of coastal forces and urbanization and land use really having this cumulative compressive force on the coastal ecosystems. And of course, we're seeing this in many places, but we're really interested in modeling it, putting a value to it, and then sharing that value with stakeholders. Lots of challenges at APG. I don't have a lot of photos of the actual site because it is a military installation and there's restrictions on taking photos there. But I did want to share that many of the coastlines are natural, and overall the land is just very low lying. And we talked to many stakeholders during our site visits who described transitioning ecosystems like wetlands migrating inland, some forests that were ghosting, and importantly, there were also some areas of APG that were identified as Superfund sites. So that kind of piqued our curiosity because if we know that there's threats, we were concerned about where those were. So we did some mapping. There was an engineering firm working on the project, EA Engineering, located in Maryland, and they had been looking at areas of criticality, sort of in a table form. And we decided to take that information and map it so that we could better visualize and have easier discussions with stakeholder. And I just pause to say that that's one of the things we primarily tried to do is make information really understandable for different stakeholders and community members. So even in our lab here at Florida, we have a faculty member, Ashwarya Shankar, who leads 5 students who work pretty exclusively on turning data and narratives and case studies into really compelling, easy to read graphics. And from here, I hope that you can see that there's some areas of criticality that are located on the southern portion of APG, and also on this area up in the northern portion, which is called Spizzuti Island. So if we look at the sea level rise map, this is really interesting. We like to do a lot of maps. We're landscape architects. We love maps. And we try to do them in a Macargian style where you overlay maps in an effort to understand areas of opportunities or areas of threats. So we often start with the projected sea level rise scenarios. And we thought this was pretty alarming. It's the moderate projected relative sea level rise. And this area that's considered Spizzuti Island pretty much disappears by 2050 in the moderate scenario. So not to say that it'll definitely be gone in 25 years, but that there's concerns about the low-lying nature of this island and its long-term viability. But also in this southern area, because those were the other pieces that were critical zones. And it turns out that that's also the place where the Superfund sites are. And so we can start to see that big areas of this landscape are being chunked out as the water continues to rise. So we also looked at another variety of maps. So one of the things that my students always sort of laugh about is that if I have information I want, I'll tell the students, I want this information and make a map. So I'm always like, just make a map out of it. And then we can see the information spatialized and we can put them one on top of another. And again, find those critical zones. So we looked at a variety of data, wave hazards and topography and bathymetry and storm surge, erosion, soils, fetch, slope. And after a while, we had all this data that we were able to collect, including a lot about the ecosystems, the tree canopy, wetlands, SAV, and how that relates to sensitive habitat. And from there, we were able to sort of build a model that could help us predict where we should put living shorelines using like a weighted input. So we looked at these places where a living shoreline would be suitable or not suitable, or a hybrid living shoreline would be suitable. So a hybrid living shoreline would have more protection, not just those natural edges, but maybe a more hardened solution, like a breakwater solution, not a seawall. We would consider that to be a fully hardened edge, but a hybrid would put a breakwater in front of it and it would be viable. And a lot of the areas of APG were suitable for hybrid or living shorelines. And so we've continued to explore this line and we've written some of this up and we have more work to do to detail our findings here, but it's just one aspect of what we were able to do because we had collected all the data for the maps. But the second big piece of the project was modeling future land use transitions and trying to calculate the carbon loss under the sea level rise scenarios. So to do this, we worked with open source we tried to do an open source workflow. So the reasoning behind that was so that it would be flexible and adaptive and people could use it globally, like use the methodology anywhere in the world. And we were also hoping that it could be something landscape architects and planners could easily incorporate into their workflow. I'm not sure we achieved that piece. I'm not sure how easy this would be for somebody who doesn't have the background in modeling, but with the paper, following the methodology in the paper and the flow chart here, there's a lot to walk through. I won't go through these steps for this, but I think it's well described and something that could be replicable, obviously. And really, it's just using like a QGIS, like an open source GIS platform with a plugin to predict those future land cover predictions using different forms of machine learning. And then layering on top of that, the INVEST model, which is another open source software that estimates carbon gains and losses from NASA carbon data. So really broad carbon data, not very finite carbon data, but it was a lot of information that we were able to put into the INVEST model. So all of that information was validated and we were able to calculate the annual rate of change for the different land cover types with and without sea level rise. So the findings were pretty like what you would expect, that the forest, the woody wetlands, and the emergent herbaceous wetlands, and they're obviously these are the key carbon sinks. They all decline under sea level rise scenarios. So that's pretty much what we expected. There were some intricacies to the data that were interesting, like at the rate of which different things declined. But really what was, I think, pretty interesting was that without sea level rise, the carbon storage dropped modestly by 2061, which is the year we were modeling out to. And basically that would be a net present value loss of roughly $40 million. But with sea level rise, the carbon storage had a sharp decline, and we predicted it would be closer to $170 million of net present value loss. And that was of interest to us because it showed it's something we could show stakeholders, that we could talk to them about at least what the value of this is in real dollars. And we have found that to be somewhat effective in getting people to move on larger nature-based infrastructure ideas for implementations. And so then we developed these design ideas and proposed some thin layer sediment placement to support revegetating the marsh to hold the wetlands at their historic boundaries, and also putting in some breakwaters. All of these and adding some SAV. All of these interventions could potentially enhance the wetland health, protect the infrastructure that was meant to be protected, and buffer sensitive contaminated lands. Particularly when we are talking not at this site, but at the other site, particularly which had the Superfund site on it, and that the cost would not be too extreme. Now, this is just the thin layer placement cost, not the breakwaters, but the thin layer placement cost we calculated at less than $1 million. So when you compare that to the carbon loss, there's potentially an argument to be made that in addition to salvaging your infrastructure, this might be an interesting proposal that someone, some of the stakeholders could take forward. And this is the area where we were looking at pollutant concerns. And we had basically the same strategy here for trying to protect some of these edges. And the pollutant concerns became like it was a highlight at the end of the project, where we were all looking at this idea of like, there's a risk of no intervention. And that is that over time, it's not only the infrastructure that's on the site now, but that the sea level rise would continue to degrade the wetlands and maybe mobilize contaminants into the Chesapeake Bay and the surrounding waters. So there's just this idea emerging that we need to do more work to understand how many coastal Superfund sites face these kind of risks. And I think just at base value, without even too much effort, you can find out very quickly that it's a lot. There's a lot of coastal Superfund sites on the national priorities list that we should be concerned about. It kind of reinforces the urgency of planning for both ecological health and public health protection. In this idea that it's potentially a lot more at risk than we were thinking about. So I think that was really one of the key takeaways from this project. Among other things, it was a very large project to take on, and we're hoping that some of our design ideas have some impact. Anyway, moving forward, I told you at the beginning I'd try to relate this back to what we're trying to do here at Florida, and we are working with the Center for Coastal Solutions. I'm a co-PI on one of the grants there that's looking at thin layer placement in St. Augustine. Here's you can see the blurb about the thin layer placement project has the ability to keep pace with sea level rise and resist erosion. There's research going on there, and we're hoping to be very influential in helping to explain to stakeholders the purpose behind this, generating those visuals, helping explain to others So these are case studies that we've been working on to understand the differences between different thin layer placement projects that are already going on, where there's marshes that are showing signs of increased soil density or vegetation colonization, and recovery in the marshes after thin layer placement of sediments that matches marshes like the reference marshes in the case studies. So we're hoping that these series of case studies is helpful for people to understand this concept a little bit more. And then the other thing we're doing is continuing this modeling effort and moving back into the state of Delaware to model the effects of the upland land use future scenarios, as well as those coastal transition zones, so that we can actually start to understand those threats to the ecological zones in the center. So again, we're working on modeling the squeeze, and these projects should be done by the spring. So moving on, I'd like to talk now about, like, that was the work at Aberdeen Proving Ground, regional scale, or at least large scale. This next project is a very small scale. It's community-based scale, and it's in Bowers Beach, Delaware. And this project was a CRDS project. Bowers Beach is a really small coastal fishing town. It's sort of like Cedar Key in many ways, and it faces frequent tidal flooding, aging infrastructure, and wetlands loss. And we had a team of undergraduate students who we took to this site a couple years ago. They checked into Airbnbs and spent time in the community talking and learning about people and learning about people's lived experience in Bowers Beach. And so they heard a lot of stories in this small town about storms and tides. Everybody knew the tide schedule, the fishing seasons, a lot of memories of how the town used to thrive in the fishing industry and how much things have changed. And so when we led our community engagement efforts, we talked about, imagine if Bowers Beach became a model coastal community for adapting and living with changing conditions along the Delaware Bay shore. What would that look like? So we presented that to our community members. And in this little tiny town, we got a lot of feedback. We learned quickly that water wasn't, just a hazard or considered poorly. It was part of daily life. Flooding was kind of part of daily life. A lot of water that came and never went. And our community members, basically, you don't have to try to digest this, but they describe the town itself as quiet, relaxing, and deeply tied to fishing and coastal traditions. They mentioned horseshoe crabs and boats and people helping each other. It was a real, if you read these, it's all about like this way this community is working with the water. They talked about the wetlands and the way life used to be. Like, it's like they slow down when they come to Bowers Beach. But they also wanted us to prioritize flood mitigation and improve water access. So lots of different projects emerged from this. And again, we had like 3 teams. Only going to talk about the marshlands restoration today, but we had teams working in other aspects to address all of the community's concerns at once. But the marshland restoration was pretty interesting, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But on the left, we see the historic marsh system. This was like some original photos that we found where you can really see this sinuous tidal landscape with a branching creek network and natural edges. And then by comparison, on the right-hand side shows 2 major shifts. Like in the marsh, the natural channels were really replaced by this rigid grid of mosquito ditching that fragmented the wetland. And in the river, we see channel widening and it's straighter. And these decisions obviously were about improving navigation or getting rid of mosquitoes, but they really changed the dynamics, the sediment dynamics and the shoreline stability. So it really altered how water was able to move across the landscape. And those legacy drainage decisions are contributing today to water stagnation, habitat loss, and really reduced coastal resilience for the town. So as sea level rise are continuing to show pressure here, we're starting to see a little bit more tidal or flooding in the homes around this area. So again, for our stakeholder presentations, we try to find ways of getting people to understand how these ditchings and things disrupted the drainage flow and altered the hydrology, and then produced marsh stressors, such as like dieback in the woodland buffer, invasive species are creeping in, and then impacts along that road that's labeled North Flack Avenue, where we're seeing water intruding into homes periodically at different times of the day. So our goal here was simple: help the marsh sort of breathe again. And to do that, we focused on restoring tidal processes, creating opportunities for the community to reconnect with the landscape through a boardwalk that we put through here as well. So the meandering tidal channels was based on some work that the students did to find case studies of similar restoration efforts that had been successful in different marshes, particularly one in New Jersey. So they've reintroduced these sinuous channels and the runnels to reconnect the water pathways and mimic natural creek morphology. And I think this is really probably the highest point of this design. It increases the tidal exchange and improves the marsh flushing. And then we included small tidal pools and mud flats along the way, just small depressions. So they were strategically using dredge spoils to create highs and low points and target different marsh species. So overall, I think it was a pretty interesting project that helped the community really understand what some of the problems were. We talked about how improving the marsh health would improve habitat and increase biodiversity. And from there, we shared with them some images of what this could look like, this human place, this boardwalked place. And overall, this really had some great outcomes. We had a lot of press around how we were helping the community build resilience. And ultimately, this didn't just end as like an undergraduate student studio exercise. The community took it forward. And I'm super excited about that because that's the win of this project. And the reason I wanted to share this with you today, because of the engagement process and all of the hydraulic analysis, the people in Bowers Beach really felt empowered to do something. And they moved forward with a formal feasibility study and a preliminary engineering phase. And so there's a current request for bids out, and you can see that it specifically cites the CRDS plan as the foundation for the work. So what this means to me is that our student-driven community design process helped unlock a real implementation potential. And being in touch with the mayor of this small town, we text on a regular basis. They feel really confident and excited about what this means. And this is just one of several projects that are going on there. So it really, I feel, is catalytic to do this. And I'm excited to move into Florida to do some of these types of projects too. I recently am connected with the city of Perry, who's been hit by several hurricanes on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and they also had a paper mill that moved out of town. And we're working on a project where we could get students to do this type of work here in Florida in our small, potentially under-resourced communities as well. So I'm hoping that we can bring that impact to Florida. So in the last just few minutes, I want to talk about a third project. This is a real small scale. This is just a site. It's a mosaic living shoreline system that we're working on in Lewis, Delaware. And our goals here are to look at a living shoreline, not just as like a linear aspect along one edge, but sort of like as a transect, and how it could be thought of as a way to really enhance a community, establish more habitat, stabilize sediments. And this project is being done in Lewis. So we had several project sites that we were working to select from, and we selected Lewis. And you can see our project site really clearly in the red box. It's that little spit of land that is jutting out into the canal. In the water in the distance is the Delaware Bay, and the inland area has a cove. That's the Delaware Boat Basin. So on the inside, the cove has very low energy, and on the outside where we're working, it's higher energy in the northern part of our project. So we get this opportunity to sort of study two different energies. and we're looking at different solutions for both sides. And the reason we wanted to work here was because there's a lot of those varied forcing, which I think was really interesting. This is on the University of Delaware's campus in Lewis, Delaware, so it's easy to work there. There's already existing mussels and oysters present, and the spit of land is really eroding, so it would actually be helpful for the boat basin if we were able to protect this. So the focus was on the Lewis Boat Basin, and in this slide you can just see the project area and the regulatory wetland. This is part of our permitting package. And our existing conditions up close from our drone photograph, you can start to see the scarped edges and the significant erosion. But what is not labeled on this photo, and it probably should be, is on the lower side beneath the rubble, on the lower right, is an existing oyster reef. So we're pretty excited that we have evidence that oysters might live here. So one of our early concepts where we brought the whole team of engineers and scientists together and we said, what could we do here? This was an early visualization, and you can see this word biomimicry not shown, but I'll show it to you how we developed this idea of biomimicry for our next slide. So a lot of these products are not unique. We're using very typical products, things that are pretty easy to purchase and inexpensive. One of them is the reef ball product, and you can see where we're going to be stacking reef balls in the front here to really help that erosion. We determined that we needed a little bit more breakwater type system here to keep, because the energy on this side is so high. And we're doing these shellfish bag mattresses up the slope. And that's the picture in the upper right-hand side where we have shell bags, but they're mattresses with jute fabric on either side so that they kind of live as a system and they're staked in. We're using bees elements in the lower left side. You can see the bees elements where we're stacking shells in them, but we're also using these bees elements as a way to secure vegetation. So bees elements are biopolymers that are 3D printed, and they come from a potato chip byproduct. So we just keep calling them our potato chip mats. We know that in Florida, they don't hold up really well. The waters here are very hot, and we're hoping they do better in Delaware in the colder waters. So we're eager to test in the same way that they were tested here in this state. And we're also, this stake with the rope frayed on it, that's our biomimicry. So we're mimicking seagrass to see if we can get any shrimp habitat. There's talk also of underwater speakers with playing shrimp music, and I'm really excited about that. That's everybody's favorite part of the project is the biomimicry. So this system is, obviously there's a lot of monitoring and research that'll be done. We are in the permitting phase. We should have been permitted by now. I'm gonna just put it out there. It's been a little slow getting our permit through the state of Delaware. And hopefully somebody on YouTube is watching this and lights a fire under the perimeter in Delaware. So we're really excited to get our permit because we're all poised and ready to get this thing installed, and then we can monitor it and do some good research. So these are just some of the images that my lab has put together, looking at this from the northern perspective with the higher energy side. You can see in the foreground of the colorful image, the reef balls that are colonizing and some of the shell mattresses up the slope and some Spartina. We're going to be doing a lot of testing of different things in this site in terms of how we're planting and how we're anchoring vegetation. So I'm really excited about that. And then from the boat basin side, the oyster reef and the rope habitat or shrimp habitat, and again, Spartina planning. So I just wanted to say in conclusion, those are three projects I went through pretty quickly. The future of my work is continuing to explore coastal resilience by design. I'm interested in how we can look at the thin layer placement project in St. Augustine as a test case to document benefits that are being determined by, all the benefits that are being done by the researchers, the scientists and the engineers. And then being the landscape architect on the group, how can I communicate those benefits to the community? So also looking at different research questions like how we can document the thin layer placement performance, advanced participatory modeling approaches through citizen science and local observations to help with our predictive modeling that we've been working on, and also developing these resilience narratives based on improvements beyond the baseline. And that's a whole nother project. So I'd like to acknowledge all of our funders. It's primarily the Army Corps of Engineers and Delaware Sea Grant, and thank all of my collaborators. I mentioned in the beginning that you can't do any of this work in isolation. We've had so many project team members and partners who contribute to all of these projects and help make them successful. And that's what I have. So thanks for your attention.
All right, let's get a round of applause, Dr. Butt. Jules, if you don't mind stopping to your screen share, we can see a little bit better.
Yep.
But we will start with questions from the room. There we go. Let's just go like. Okay, well, we disappeared. Trust that we are here, Jules, and so.
I see you.
Okay, oh, you do? All right, we don't, I don't know.
You don't see me.
Yeah, questions from the room for Dr. Buck. Yeah, Erin.
So when you were communicating with the fishing town in Bowers Beach, how did you go about that in a way that they didn't feel defensive, that there was this outside group coming in and maybe trying to change things? How did you approach that?
Wow, that's such a great question. And I appreciate your, that's spot on. You have to be super careful. And I think one of the ways that we are able to integrate into community is through the fact that we're bringing students. So in some ways, it feels like an educational experience to the town. Believe me, when you walk in with a whole bunch of undergraduate students, it really lowers the expectation. So the bar is pretty low. So they're hoping that they get something out of this and they're willing to participate, but they never really could, they can't actually believe what the students are able to produce. That CRDS project was fantastic. It led to so many outcomes that are positive for the town. And then we stayed with the town because they liked interacting with our students so much. One of our PhD students developed a VR presentation of sea level rise and did research on whether or not seeing the sea level rise impacts over time changed their ability to prepare, or their willingness to prepare for disasters. So it was like a disaster management kind of case study using the town of Bowers. And they were really incredibly generous. And I think it's because we bring students. I think if we were just professionals walking in, it would have a different feel.
Thanks. So I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. So what, you work a lot interdisciplinarily, you work with a lot of scientists and engineers, and of course, bring this other perspective from landscape planning, so what's the number one thing that you would hope a scientist or engineer would know that they don't know, that we don't know now? Like, what's the gap that would be like the number one thing that would make all of this more effective from a science and engineering communication point of view? Or yeah,
that's a great question. In fact, we're studying this. Mark is on the line, and he's part of a project that we're working on with a graduate student in looking at some of the communication problems between interdisciplinary teams and ways that we could improve communication. And I think what we're really finding is that everybody likes the idea of communicating and working together, but it is very easy to stay in your own lane. You almost need someone like a landscape architect or a social scientist on the team who doesn't understand everything that's going on about the science and the engineering to continuously ask a ton of questions. So we ask so many questions and we try so hard to interpret what we're hearing and learning through graphics. And those graphics become this great way of exploring concepts together. So if I don't understand something, I'll draw it. Is this what you mean? Well, no, it's more like this. And so together with that communication style going back and forth, eventually we can understand and we can learn and bring everyone together. And it's always surprising how many ideas come out of that. So innovations happen when we all start talking and trying really hard to understand each other's fields.
Great. Thanks.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, just like trying to guide students towards, a skill set beyond, like active listening, or is it visual? Is it?
It's not being afraid to pick up the pen, not being afraid to ask and clarifying positions. So if somebody says something that I don't understand, I just keep asking until I fully understand. And don't be afraid to do that. I think it's really important to say, wait, could you explain that data one more time? Or I really don't understand that chart. Is there a way we could spatialize it? Could we think about this differently? Is this what you mean? And so I think when you have somebody in the room who just asks a lot of questions in a true effort to seek to understand, that's a really interesting skill set to have. It's a design mindset that I think can be beneficial to anybody.
Great, thanks. Maybe we have time for one more. This is from Ryan Riordan from YouTube. Really appreciate the presentation. Your conceptual designs are really detailed for pre-feasibility design. Do you find there's a certain level of detail needed to appease the grant or the stakeholder, acceptance or even permit, applications and things like that?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. For the permit applications, we had to go into a lot more detail to understand the design work. And that's why we really had to come together as a group of interdisciplinary researchers looking at this together, trying to understand the system and how we would put it together for the permit agents. So that level of detail was much bigger than what we sometimes get to when we're doing the Bowers Beach project, where we have the marsh plan. But it is really interesting to me that it's a simple graphic. They're almost like cartoons, right? They don't have a ton of detail to them, like that marsh restoration plan. But it's almost like we've simplified it so much that my town mayor, the mayor of Bowers Beach, Ada, can take it to her state legislator and say, don't you understand it now? Like, it's so simple. This is what we need to do. And the people who have the control of the money and have the opportunity to fund these projects go, yeah, I can understand that, but let's make sure it's right. And our next step is always those feasibility studies. So we're really excited when we hear that our small towns take our cartoon drawings and they take it to a feasibility study. And I'm also really surprised at how close the students come. There's been a couple feasibility studies where they're like, yeah, it's just, let's go, let's do this. It happened in Little Creek, it happened in Bowers. So we've had projects that the feasibility is right. So that means the students got the right answer. It's validating, especially given that they're not wetland scientists, but there's people these are interdisciplinary student teams. This is not a group of landscape architects. So there are engineers and environmental scientists on the team. And we could not do this work without that. They all bring a very special skill set and knowledge base to each project.
Thanks, Jules. Well, let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Bruck.
Thanks.
Thanks for telling us.
Thanks, everyone.
We have two seminars left for the semester. Next week, we have Renee Price, who's a PhD candidate in my lab, actually. So she's getting ready to defend her dissertation, and she's going to talk next week about lessons learned from 2 decades of wetland monitoring data. So with that, we will see you soon. Thanks again, Jules. Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
And have a
Thank
great
Jules.
week.
Reach out if you want to connect.